Our only female panelist in the middle of this panel is Rebeka Dóra Kajos. She's working in Budapest in Hungary with troubled kids and teenagers, and she has done so for many years now, since her high school age actually. And she's doing that as a professional now in the alternative Kontiki school in Budapest, where she leads different projects in different fields. For example, she does a nonviolent school radio, she started a school newspaper, and she also leads the social circus activities, which she will tell more about very soon. And she also teaches yoga, and very recently she has started her studies in adventure therapy. Our next panelist here sitting next to me is Rado Sloboda from Slovakia, from Banska Bystrica. And he and some other people founded the anti-extremist platform Not in My Town after Marian Kotleba was elected governor of the region in 2013?
2014.
2014, okay. As a reaction from civil society to stand up against this right-wing extremist politician. And he's coordinated this platform for more than 3 years and now also works as an expert for it. And they also, with this platform, they organize different events and bring together different people who are engaged in the community against right-wing extremism. The panelist sitting next to Rebeka is Bjørn Ihler, who joins us from Norway. And he is a survivor of the 2011 terrorist attacks carried out by Anders Behring Breivik, who shot 69 people on the island of Utøya, where Bjørn luckily survived this attack.
Yay.
And since already before, but especially since then, he is engaging in many different activities to spread narratives countering right-wing extremism in talks, in writing, in filmmaking, and in theater performances. And on the other side of the panel, from my point of view, we have Stefan Schuster, who joins us from Berlin, and he's working as a social worker for many years for the association Gangway. He started in the early 90s building a shelter for young punks and squatters in Berlin, then also worked with the then still kind of sub-legal techno scene in Berlin in the mid-90s before he turned to more regular street work, social work in the southeastern district of Treptow-Köpenick in Berlin, where he's still working with many or with disadvantaged kids from many different backgrounds, and often encounters mostly young, or encounters many young people that are attracted to right-wing scenes or share right-wing ideas, and one of his major goals is to prevent them from slipping into these scenes. And maybe also one quick word about myself. My name is Oliver Kossak. I'm also working in Berlin for an NGO called Cultures Interactive. You can see it there. And we use youth cultures, for example, like hip-hop, skateboarding, YouTube, and so on, and combine it with civic education, also to better reach young people for prevention and de-radicalization, with de-radicalization programs. Okay, so after having said that, I would like to give the word or the floor to the panel to introduce their approaches, and I think you decided to go just the straight line, so Rado will start.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for invitation. As Oliver mentioned, we established the platform Not in Our Town, which was kind of reaction on victory of Marian Kotleba in the regional election in 2013. And the reason why we founded this kind of platform was that we, after a few months, we realized that only reactions on Kotleba actions are not enough, and if we want to change something and bring some new narratives, so we should create some proactive activities. And one of the big field was education. So we founded also kind of sub-program in Not in Our Town platform, which focus on education and educational activities, mainly on secondary and high schools. And we were looking for some best practices and try to combine good practices from Slovakia and from abroad to create some useful mix of educational activities. And first part of our approach is inspired by Oliver organization, Cultures Interactive. So we took two main approaches. One is youth cultural approach, which is focused on the work with subcultures and maybe more generally with things and activities which can be interesting for young people. So for example, when you are working with a group of young people who really like YouTubering, so that's good reason for us to set up educational workshops and activities which work with creating of videos and using it on the various social media. And we put like between or among parts about this subculture some activities connected with post-classic civic education. So at the end we have activities which are partially focused on things which are really cool for young people, and partially we have activity which can bring some new information, perspectives and experience to young people. And so this is first part, strongly inspired by Cultures Interactive. And the second part is based on one activity which called human libraries, and maybe some of you know this approach. And human libraries are activities where people who has experience with discrimination or human rights violence tell their stories to young people. And this activity or this approach, at least for us, look like as very effective, because we realized that explicit information and facts are important, but it is not enough when we want to change or influence the values and opinions of young people, mainly some of them who really like people like Marian Kotleba and various conspiracy theories and medias. And in human libraries, you are not working with explicit information, but you're really working with the personal stories of people. And I think you can saw it in previous panel that these personal stories are probably the most most useful way how to show to young people that open society, democracy, and human rights are really important. And besides human libraries and activities based on cultural interactive approaches, we try to inspire young people to create their own activities and actions. So when we organize, or after we organize this kind of activities for them, so we start processes which should motivate them to organize their own things, because we believe that only a person who really tastes the democracy in the way that I can organize something or I can change something, so only in these cases this concrete person can really start to believe that democracy is the good system, and it's not a good idea to vote for neo-fascist or far-right parties. So this is short description of our approach, and maybe I can add some more things later during the discussions. But I would like to highlight that the very important values for us, which we try to implement in our activities, are things like relationships, friendship, because this is something which create a connection between us, and at least for us, this is something which can save us before some catastrophic things can come. And also we try to create kind of, and yeah, I am not sure if we are really successful in that, but I think that it's important for all people who work with the radicalization or prevention to try to create kind of fascination among young people, fascination about the open society, democracy, and this kind of thing, because without fascination we cannot really develop our current societies to something better. We really have to believe that this is something good, and that also some bad people sometimes come, and we have to deal with that, but not in a way that we will confrontate them and create various kind of violence, like symbolic or physical, but we have to find another way. And I think that bringing new like narratives and stories is the best way how to do that. And I'm not sure if I have some time. Yeah, okay. So I had only short story at the end of my part that maybe some of you know that in 50s in the United States, like first information about a connection between cancer and smoking was published, and many serious scientists support that. So in 50s, some big tobacco companies thought that this is the end for them, but they create a PR campaign not focus on some big argument with scientists, but they decided that they will create the bigger and bigger controversy. So they told to people, okay, this is serious, so we will pay the better scientists to explore all this issue. And they did that for some time, but after some months, this story was not really interesting for media and the people. So for them, this kind of approach that keeping controversy alive, it shows that it was working, and it is also working today when people like Donald Trump or next kind of people like Marian Kotleba in Slovakia. So for them, they cannot really need to show that they are right. They only have to keep controversy alive, and we have evidence from this tobacco story in 50s in the United States. We have some evidence from current days. So, like my message for this panel is that we really have to like work more with emotions and relationships, and less with strong and explicit information and facts. Not because facts are bad, facts are good, and I respect that, but facts are not enough to win this battle, let's say, between people who trust in democracy and people who trust in some not so good ideologies, let's say.
Okay, thank you, Radu, for this telling example and for your message, and also for describing how you stood up after the election of Kotleba. So now I'll give the floor to Rebeka.
Okay, thank you for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here. And I'm going to tell you a bit about social circus and its methods. First of all, our motto is circus is for everyone, and I think it describes more or less what are we trying to teach while doing circus with our kids. I spend my work days with disadvantaged youth. They are from 15 to 25 years old, but I worked with social circus also with refugee kids as a volunteer. And we experienced while working with them that they are really closed, they are afraid of other people, they have no trust in others, and circus seemed a very good method to open them. Because it's a magical thing for them. So when they see someone juggling with 3 balls, they think that, okay, I will never be able to do it, and it's such a crazy thing. It's, I don't know, I'm not able even to catch a ball or something. And then when you need to throw a ball to someone, they need to look into your eyes, and it grows the trust in everyone. And all this circus practice is about trust and cooperation and working in groups, and not about just being yourself practicing. But for example, you need to imagine this circus workshop that is not just one occasion, but it's a series of workshops. And it's always about building group dynamics, and first you just teach them something, but they need to understand that you're not a master of juggling or something, but you're a student like them. And you're learning all together new tricks, and you just first you show them one trick, for example, and they all try it in a group, and they experience in the first minute that everyone makes mistakes, and I make mistakes. So it's not that you cannot make mistakes. It's just you have to make mistakes to learn new things. You have to laugh at yourself, at others, and you have to feel comfortable in this kind of situation. And when we start this kind of circus workshops, we just start with easy group dynamic games and trust games, and then we continue with trying these circus disciplines like juggling balls, diabolo, devil sticks. I often use also slackline, which is more like adventure therapy, but I like to mix things. and there are also balance exercises and also some acrobatics. So there are really a lot of things, and they can choose what they prefer, and what they don't like, they don't need to practice, and that's it. But first you just show them all kind of things. Then the third part of this series of workshops is to prepare a show all together. And there's gonna be kids who doesn't want to participate in a show, obviously, because they don't want to be on the stage. But we have to find all together the place to everyone. Like, for example, they can just write the script or just help to do the makeups for the others. But we have to work in a big group all together and make a common goal of ours. But it's just the final goal, because there are really simple goals. For example, okay, now I try to throw one ball from my right hand to the left, and I failed, I don't know, 20 times. But it's my goal to do it, and everyone has simple goals, so they experience that they can reach their goals, because in their life they experience often that they cannot reach their goals. And circus is a good way to show to them that everyone is special, and you are special, and as everyone is special, everyone is equal. So they are good comparisons while doing circus. And for me, it's very important that circus is very easy to combine with other things. So I worked as well with Cultures Interactive, actually, and we made our trainings for youth doing a civic education part and the social circus part. We did also other things, but I will tell you only about this. And there is a really nice short film called Butterfly Circus. Maybe you know about it. And it's about old-time circus. So it's not about new wave circus. It's all about exclusion, calling others freaks and just show them to the people, and I don't know, show them that they are different and you need to laugh at this because this is the most interesting thing that you can imagine. And this butterfly circus is a real circus, and they try to change all this old way of circus. And I really love this story, and it's a good way to introduce social circus after a civic education part of a workshop, for example. And I saw a lot of interesting changes in the students, because we practice together almost all weeks, but they can ask me to practice circus with them anytime because I'm with them all the time. But we have regular classes like once in a week, 2 hours a week, for example. And we have a lot of opportunity also. We have collaboration with other circuses, and they just get to know these artists, and all these myths about artists and people who know something special is just become their reality, and they are doing the same thing, and they feel that they are more than they thought, and they are much talented, so they have a lot of success, and their self-esteem grows. So I never had a bad experience with circus, but we need to find a way how to introduce it to them, because if you introduce them in a very pushy way, it can be very uncomfortable too, because if you have no patience to show them the way they can be patient with themselves, they're gonna get bored in 1 second and just leave it. So there are different methods how to introduce also circus. And yeah, maybe I'm gonna tell you more experiences also after this session, or if there is a question about it, I would be happy to answer them. Yeah, so thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Rebeka. And now I think we're going to hear what Bjørn's doing.
All right. Thank you all for being here and for listening to us. As Oliver said in the introduction, in 2011 I was almost killed by a terrorist. And there were several reasons for that, and one of them was that I was with the Labour Youth Party, which worked for a more inclusive, more diverse community in Norway. And one of the things I wanted to promote, and one of the things I've wanted to promote my entire life, essentially, is diversity and having a diverse community. And that's one of the reasons why I joined with the Labour Youth Party originally as well. Unfortunately, the far right is not so fond of these ideas of people living together in diversity and in peace, and in fact don't think that's possible. After the attack, I devoted myself to working against extremism and to understand how someone becomes someone like Breivik, how someone decides to pick up a gun and start shooting at people because their beliefs are different. And that's led me on to this, what is now 6-year-long journey of working with radicalized individuals, working with extremists, working with former extremists, and really understanding the paths both into and out of extremism. One of the core things of that is understanding extremism itself and understanding what extremism is. And really a core element of it, in my worldview at least, is about diversity, about the ability for people to understand that they can live together and hold different identities, hold different opinions, and still be themselves while someone else is someone else. And so an element of what I do is building strong positive identities, saying it's okay that you are you. No one's threatening you for being you. It's not a threat to your identity that someone holds another identity. And that's a big element of what I think we are all doing at this panel, teaching people to live with who they are. There's another element of extremism, which is where the violence kicks in, where it becomes the violent denial of diversity. And I think understanding violence as well is something that's important in this work, in the work to de-radicalize individuals, because we have to understand the trajectories of violence. We have to understand it before it actually happens in the form of direct violence. I come from a background of peace and conflict studies, and one of the big masters of peace and conflict studies is Johan Galtung, a fellow Norwegian. And he has a theory of the 3 types of violence, which is direct violence, structural violence, and cultural violence. And so in many cases, violent extremism is often early on expressed through cultural violence, through the incitement of hatred. Then it becomes pushes for structural violence, for building legislation that is directly oppressing certain groups of people who are different from the people who are trying to create that legislation. Then it becomes direct violence, where someone actually physically attacks someone else, where someone kills someone. And that is what we, at all costs, try to avoid. After 2011, I started, as I've said, to explore what extremism was and understand how someone became someone like Breivik. A key element of that was going to the court in 2011, back when the first open hearings were being held. And I went to the courtroom and I saw Breivik. Before this moment, he had been spoken about as some sort of monster. People called him He Who Shall Not Be Named, and I grew up on Harry Potter. I don't know about you guys, but Harry Potter was the first book I read in like 3 languages. So I knew what that meant, He Who Shall Not Be Named. It's what they call the Lord Voldemort in the Harry Potter books, the evil, the great evil, the monstrosity that everyone fears. And not saying the name is a big theme because it dehumanizes someone. It shows you that it's either he is less than human or he is more than human. Is he a demigod of some sort? He became this monster in our society, Anders Behring Breivik. And so people started fearing him irrationally and thinking that he had some sort of power that he doesn't have. So I went to the court and I sat down, and into the courtroom came this man in shackles. And he was completely disarmed. The last time I had seen him, he had pointed a gun at my head and fired. And here he was in the courtroom, unable to do anything, and he was just a man. And realizing that and seeing that he was just a man helped me understand that all extremists are just human. They're just people. And the big difference between us and extremists is that extremists believe that some people are not, in fact, as much people as they are. They're not as human as they are. They dehumanize other people. They say some people are worth less than they are. And in standing up against extremists, it's incredibly important that we keep that in mind and don't follow their path by saying that extremists are less than human. And that's been a big kind of theme for my work for the last few years, which includes working for the human rights and the conditions of Breivik himself as he is in prison. Other elements of my work has been changing that broader narrative in society about how we treat each other, how we see each other as human. Narratives is something that comes up in working against extremism a lot, and I see there as kind of 2 different levels of narratives. There are the societal, communal narratives that we hold as a group, or as a nation, or as a community of some sort. And then there is the personal narrative of an individual. Because my worldview is that we are all stories. We are all the stories we tell about who we are and who others are. And those stories determine our relationships and our fears and how we act and how we react to each other. And so extremists tell stories that are damaging about themselves and about the people surrounding them. And what I want is to change those stories and make those stories positive. And so last year I started an organization named Omelas. And Omelas looks at the stories people tell about themselves. We have a lot of ways of telling stories about ourselves these days. We used to have stories about, or used to have platforms for telling stories about our society and our community, which is traditional media. Now we all have our own media outlets, our own channels of telling our own stories, and we tell them through social media. And so we are looking at social media and we're seeing what stories people tell about themselves. And sometimes we see that people are telling stories that are damaging, stories that are distancing themselves from others, that are creating a gap that is increasing the potential of violence. And so when we see those stories being told, we pick up on those individuals and we reach out to them and we say, hey, maybe we should have a chat. And in fact, one of the most powerful means of de-radicalizing someone, working actively to bring someone back out of a mindset of extremism, is by reaching out to them and say, hey, let's have a chat. Because then they feel they are being seen, they feel they are being part of a community. They feel valued, they feel that someone cares about them, about their grievances, about the root causes for why they want to join a violent movement in the first place. And seeing and understanding that is vital in bringing people back out. And so we reach out, we speak to people, we ask them how their life is going, and we offer a different path. We offer a different story or trajectory of stories for their life, where someone offers them a path into violence, into extremism, into hate. We offer them a path into community, into working for good, working against those very real grievances a lot of them hold in constructive ways, in ways that are better than those that are offered by extremist organizations. And so what we're doing is creating an alternative story, an alternative storyline for the lives of these individuals. And we are bringing them out of extremist movements. And I think that is about it. I hope you guys like that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for not only telling us about your work, but also, of course, about your personal experience and sharing what you experienced there. And now, the last one on the panel. But last but not least, certainly.
I could talk for hours as well, so don't offer that.
Well, glad to begin with me. You know, I'm just a social worker. You know, this is. Well, let me explain a bit about me. I'm 48 years old now. My father was a refugee. My mother was a war child. That video what we saw before, just from the Syrian camp, is one of the kids that could have been easily my mother. We often forget this, that we as the Germans have a tradition of refugees too. Many millions, just like my father, fled from their home country and never had to return back. Half of my father's family was killed by a Russian bomber while fleeing. My mother has suffered lots and lots of nights in her childhood, and believe me, she's still traumatized with that. She's in her 80s now. So this is what we also forget if we are talking about Germans. Me, myself, I went to the East German Army in 1986 to become an officer at the frontier in the Berlin Wall, the German Wall. And I finished my studies in 1990 when there was no more war to go. So bad luck for me, or good luck. Because to be honest, I've been an extremist then. I've been part of that structural terror we're talking about, structural violence. I was ready to shoot at civilians if they crossed the border. I was so deep in communist and Stalinist extremism ideology, I easily could have killed someone. And by luck, some other one made the decision to tear down the wall. It was not me then. And so the next 2 years I spent in social deprivation. I didn't find a job anymore because of my communist career back and stuff like that. So I was at the bottom of the society. And then someday somebody came and said, we look for social workers. Do you want to become a social worker? And I had no imagination what a social worker was. But I thought, okay, I'm social and I can work. Maybe that's a good idea to become a social worker. Then I started to work with young punks, house squatters, and anarchists in Berlin, where there were these real big fights, somebody might remember or not, where their whole blocks, street blocks were occupied by punks and squatters, and there was riot police everywhere and tear gases for weeks and months. Very big battles took place there. And I was amongst that as a social worker trying to talk with everybody. And then I changed and started to work with what I call white German underclass youth. And the districts I work with are all in the east of Berlin, where you have those white German underclass people. Which is very interesting because if we talk about social work, there comes in a lot of, we work with minorities, and we work with this and that, with refugees and migrants and stuff. Well, that's what I say. I'm just a social street worker. I go around the streets and looking for poor white German underclass people because somebody has to do that. And still, you know, the area where I work now is a rather rich one in Berlin. Had for years and years only a percentage of 3% of migrants there. Everybody else was German. And even now, many people who move there from the underclass move there because they check up, you know, the doorbells for the names. And they move there because there's so many German names there. And so you can imagine what kind of atmosphere that creates. So what I'm doing is, basically, I just walk around the streets, look for people who might be in assistance or who might be in need of assistance, and then I offer it to them. Being a kind of a link between organizations like yours and the kids who hang around just there and wait for somebody to come there to do something. Because the biggest problem for kids that I meet on the street obviously is it's boring. They're not starving or fighting their neighborhood or stuff like that. It's just boring. And they wait for somebody who does something that is less boring. And if that somebody sells drugs, it's okay. If that somebody is somebody who invites them for home for taking funny pictures of them for pedophile reasons, that's okay. It's less boring. And if this is somebody who's coming with strange ideas, ideological ideas, and offers, you know, let's go into the woods and play army and shooting and stuff like that, or let's do some crazy stuff about, it's just boring, let's do the Hitler salute. Everybody it will be less boring. Let's see what the neighbors will do with it. Kind of like that. And so we go there and offer something to make it less boring, to make it more interesting. The big thing about this is that our kids are very, very bad educated. And this is why I used my own biography to introduce myself, because nearly everything I have on the street is my own biography. And so if discussions come on with those kids about political issues, just like about refugees, for example, it is very hard to argue with them. Because of their bad education, they are not able to understand ideas that are longer than one sentence. And that sentence has to be 5 words. And so it's more being emotional. You know, sentences like, answers like, you know, it's all the fault of the refugees. It's a very easy answer to a very, very complicated question. Why is my life so bad? It's all the fault of the refugees. So then you can say, okay, I'm a refugee too, or a refugee child too. And your father has been too. So, this is about emotions, and this is about what we are doing. And so, yeah, I'm doing this, and now I finished.
You get a fist bump for that.
Okay, thank you very much. That came quickly. Yeah, so I think we've heard a lot of different approaches to de-radicalization and prevention in different fields, but we also heard quite similar things. So I think like all of you, were talking a lot about trust and self-fulfillment, self-esteem, feeling valued, and lots of like this emotional side of this work. And we already have heard before how important this is. But when we look at the situation right now, and we are talking about violent extremism, which is also always connected to ideological traits of different kinds, I would like to ask you how you see those two things connected, or how you connect them in your work, or which role they play together.
That's a complex question which requires complex answers, as you suggested there. If you don't mind, I'll start off and then see where we go. But I think one way in which I deal with extremism is as extremism. I don't really think there's much value necessarily in looking at the ideological differences, because at the end of the day, the ideologies become excuses for why we are acting in a certain way. They become where people are attaching their actions to some sort of ideology in order to explain to themselves and the people surrounding them why they are acting in the way they are acting. I've spoken to people and worked with people who have been far left extremists, who have been in the communist movements in various places, violently Antifa people, who have then turned over and become violently far right people, who have then turned again and become violent Islamists. These ideologies are more or less arbitrary, because what it boils down to is the emotions. It is the sense of belonging, the sense of value, and with that also the sense of fear. I think what we are often not speaking about enough is kind of the relationship between fear and bravery. And within each of the ideologies we see extremism in, there is an element of a definition of bravery, of what it means to be someone brave, a warrior within that ideology. The far right has an extremely heavy kind of Hitlerjugend and heritage element to it, in which people want to pick up arms, to become warriors, to fight for the white race, to fight for white supremacy. In the Islamist narrative, there is a lot about being a mujahideen, being a warrior for the Islamic State, for the religion of Islam, for people who are often been seeing themselves as still dealing with issues of colonialism, who very much still are, in fact, dealing with issues of colonialism and a historic past of the relationship between the East and the West in terms of both the history of the Ottoman Empire and the various Arabic empires and so forth that has been pushing towards the West, and the West that has been pushing back through crusades. Like there is a long history there of war and of warriors and what it means to be a warrior within those cultures. And so those cultures comes with a long history and a long history of what it means to be a true believer, a true fighter for that ideology. But it also comes with affairs of who are the others, who are the people who want to exterminate us. Because at the end of the day, it usually boils down to the fear of someone wanting to exterminate someone else. The white supremacists have this idea of a white genocide, that there are people coming in from the rest of the world trying to breed with our women and take over Europe and bring in all sorts of, I don't know, even like it's just weird at some point. And the Islamic world have similar worldviews in terms of the West is trying to take over, to colonize, to destroy this cultural heritage that exists there. And so I think we need to scratch deeper into the levels of what this existential fear is about. Like, why are people so afraid? And the cure that I suggested here last summer at the TEDx down the street is about reclaiming bravery and redefining what bravery means. And so one of the things we can do with extremists is talking about not only their ideology, but what that ideological past and history brings with it in terms of what has bravery historically been within these various cultures. And often that is about reaching out. It's about speaking to each other, about learning to coexist in constructive ways. And so I think there are historic pasts to draw upon in the ideologies for that as well. And so we can look at the narratives and bring in those elements in order to create these new paths that I spoke about earlier, based in the same foundations of ideology as the ideology of the violence. But there might be controversies over that one.
No, I didn't want to do controversial.
You were like sighing very heavily. So
No,
like,
just no.
Can be controversial. It's no problem.
No,
It's
I
okay.
just wanted to add something to that what you said.
Sure.
Because if I come from my role, the question is, I look at an individual
Yeah.
and look at what went wrong in your life. Or let's say different to in the case of prevention. So what is going wrong in somebody's life that he or she becomes an extremist? I've worked with several young women who were higher level in organizations and right-wing extremist organizations, and all of them have been victim of child abuse.
Yep.
And this is, just to give you an example. To me, as a social worker, it was a very interesting point when that man, I'm talking about, insisted to be called by his mother's name, which could be a signal for me as a social worker if somebody is somehow gives a distance between him and his father.
Yeah.
Because what I see is often that people who choose a violent way in life, not only political but also political, there's a very, very big problem with fathers or father figures in the family. That's the same, my colleagues, we are widespread all over Berlin. My colleagues tell the same about people who are in the Islamic or in the Muslim community, where you have very, very strong family structures. In our field, it's more we have weaker family structures. People, 3 children, 4 fathers, that thing. So there's always a kind of father figure and a problem with this. And so, to me, this is very much interesting because I can say, where is my intervention? Where is the point of my intervention to prevent bad things from happening?
Yeah.
This is I just wanted to add this.
As I mentioned introductionally, English, guys, it's a difficult language. As I mentioned to begin with,
earlier,
the ideology seems to be more or less arbitrary. It seems to be arbitrary kind of which camp people fall into ideologically. What I was speaking to in terms of de-radicalization was more after the fact, when people are belonging to some sort of ideology, we can look into that ideology and see how we can use that in order to counter the violence of that ideology. But you're definitely onto something there when it comes to father figures, and that's kind of one of the elements that extremist organizations often offer as well. They offer a sense of belonging in terms of a family. A lot of the former extremists I've been working with are people who grew up in weak families or in abusive families that were a bit too strong. And so what we're looking at there is essentially replacing the family through essentially gangs. And so those gangs come with ideology, and then the ideology is something that we can use in the de-radicalization. But at the root of it, family issues, yes, very much a root cause.
So Rebeka, Rado, have you anything to add, any experience?
Yeah, I wanted to add that, for example, in our school, it's a bit different story because we have always the same students in the school, even if they are usually dropouts, so they're not really attending like every class, and they are just coming, passing by, saying hello, and then they leave, or they just hang out with the friends and they are not going to the lessons. But it's a very different situation because we have always this group of people who know each other already, and they know each other's stories. And even if we have a lot of Roma students and non-Roma students, refugee students, we have students who are very good at sports, and that's why they couldn't attend their previous school. But they are just from a normal family background, and they have no problem at all. But they face this situation that they enter in a school where they're all problematic background kids. And it's a really interesting experience that when they enter to our school in the beginning of the school year, we have this 6 weeks inclusive period when they have no classes, and they just have the opportunity to get to know each other and themselves better, And we have a lot of sensibilization activities with them. It's like civic education, but also just going on a hiking tour, so different kind of activities. And by the end of these 8 or 6 to 8 weeks, they feel that they are in a safe space. And we always set rules in the classes, during the social circus workshops, for example. And the first thing that they always say that the first rule, the most important rule, is that we cannot hurt each other in this space. While we are here, we just cannot tell each other that, oh, okay, you are stupid, and you are just, I don't know, just don't come to this class, for example. You cannot tell something like this to the others. And I think that's why we have less extremist situations, for example, in the school, but we always try to deal with their aggression, what they just, I don't know, tell us that, for example, after school, what happened. That it's different from what happens in the school, because in the school, we experience that they are really calm, they are really open, after a while, obviously, but they always say that, okay, we had a conflict with this other guy from the school, I won't hurt him in the school, but after school I'm gonna find him and blah, blah, blah. So we have to deal with this, which is not our territory, obviously, because we cannot follow them everywhere, but we just try to we have this restorative conflict management in the school, so we try to deal with the conflicts, asking everyone about how you feel about this problem. Did you feel bad when you heard that these two friends of yours want to, I don't know, kill each other after school? So we just try to prevent conflict, not conflicts, but prevent actual bad things to happen. Talking to them, but not in a formal way, but just doing, for example, a circus class and just invite them both, and while doing something which just switch off their brain and this aggression part of their feelings. We just try to bring up, oh, I've heard that there was some conflict, okay, and we are just playing, and they doesn't feel that pressure that they usually feel when you want to be really serious and just talk about their feelings. So it's our technique, or we try to use a lot of techniques, obviously, and just, okay, it doesn't work, then switch to the other one, and doesn't work, switch to the other one. But this works usually, this kind of doing something else while speaking, and discuss it in a big group, so it's not about only those two persons, but about all their friends and all their class and maybe all the school, because it's not a big school, so we are mainly in 100 in the school, but everyone knows each other really well, so maybe it affects everyone's behavior or the way how they feel that day. So yeah, that's how we deal with it mainly.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry? Maybe short. Yeah, sure. Short answer. Yeah, I agree with what Stefan said, that this, let's say, personal history is key thing. And I had several conversations or activities where some young radicals or extremists were participants. And in our city, in our activities, we can identify these people. We can provide them some or offer them some of our time, but we realized that we don't have enough capacity to go deeper with them, and we also realized that we're missing some kind of structure or initiative or organization of social workers in our city, which can provide something like that. So that was motivation for us to start cooperation with pedagogical faculty in our city, with students of social work. So we are working on that, and we would like to create some team of people, future social workers, who can like continue, that we can do some steps with these people, but we need the next people who will focus only on these, let's say, the most extreme examples.
Okay, thank you. Maybe one more question from me before I give the floor to you also as well to your questions. I was thinking, like, we're not sitting here and discussing this issue for no reason. I think it also comes from the fact that in the last, I don't know, decade or so, violent extremism, be it right-wing extremism, right-wing populism, also Islamic terrorism, we had several attacks during the last decade or two, is on the rise. And I would ask if you feel new challenges, especially for instance, through the rise of right-wing populism in the last decades, for example. Does it change your work? Do you address this issue especially, or is it becoming increasingly important to the young people? For example, for you, Radu, who I think, for you it was a starting point, the election of Marianne Kotleba, to really engage with founding an NGO.
Yeah, because I started when after Marianne Kotleba victory, which was in the regional election. So I think that was the first sign of something in Slovakia. So I cannot really compare like situation before and now, but it's true that among people who are cooperate with me in Banská Bystrica, so it's I think still worse and worse that when you see the results of elections and some prediction of next elections, for example in France, etc., etc. So and also political discourse in Slovakia. I think it's more difficult to work in this field, even like in 2013 where Kotleba won the regional election, and the biggest problem for us is probably that we feel that one thing is work of NGOs and civic activists and initiatives, but on the other hand you need some political representation which can move this thing forward. So we have some natural limitation, like NGOs and civic activists, but without politicians who can push this topic, it's hard to change something from broader perspective. So this is the biggest challenge, but I don't know how to change that, because me and at least people in Banská Bystrica around me and around Not in Our Town initiative are not really people who want to go to the election and this kind of thing.
What about the others? Do you?
I think one of the big problems is kind of what's happening while we're paying attention to other things. And so for the last few decades, since 2001 really, we've pretty much in kind of the public debate in Europe and the US, and pretty much all over the place, only been paying attention to Islamist extremism, kind of forgetting that extremism has a long history past that point, because 9/11 was so big. We keep forgetting about the Irish Republican Army and the fact that the attack we saw in London 2 weeks ago was a weekly occurrence a couple of decades ago in London. And we keep forgetting that there has been anarchist extremist movements, there's been all sorts of non-religious extremist movements. Extremists have always found their ideologies for doing what they do, and sometimes they are fighting for causes that might seem more justifiable than other causes. And we find it difficult these days to rationalize, in kind of mainstream society at least, why people will be religious extremists, but they are really kind of fighting for the same psychological reasons, I think. And so what kind of scares me is the fact that we've been paying so much attention to Islamist extremism that we've forgotten to pay attention to the far right that has grown as a result of the attention we've given to the Islamist extremism. We are way overstating the issue of Islamist extremism, and if we look at what's happening, we see that the far right is possibly equal or even greater threat to the actual security of people in Europe and the US. We see that there are attacks on mosques, on synagogues. We see attacks on refugee centers. We see all sorts of attacks that are not being reported on. And the fact that these attacks are not being reported on, while attacks like the one in London a few weeks ago are being massively over-dramatized in terms of them being seen as attacks on the kind of fabric of society, fabric of democracy, is problematic. Not that we should understate the severity of any attacks, but if we are understating the severity of some attacks while hyping the severity of some other attacks, we have an imbalance that is creating an increased tension, which again is feeding into the far right, and that's kind of why we see the far right growth we've seen across Europe over the last couple of years. And that's highly problematic. So I think we need to be better in how we critically analyze what's going on in this world and start remember history past 9/11 as well.
Okay. I wanted to add also that among the students, the main problem is that they, for example, haven't been abroad. They live in a really closed world. So whenever they read, for example, one poster of the government about refugees, they just believe it because they have no experience about it. And they just, okay, it's like that, okay. They don't want to rethink it or consider it. They don't read newspapers. They don't really watch TVs because they usually live in orphanage or something like this, so they don't have the opportunity to read other things or, I don't know, just talk about these kind of issues in Hungary, for example, with others, because in the school we cannot really talk about politics we can, but not in this direct way. And we try to introduce them to the real world. For example, inviting a lot of foreigners to the school or volunteers from India or refugees who live here in Hungary to tell them how are their experiences. But for example, when we had a few years ago this refugee crisis in the railway station, and there were hundreds and hundreds of refugees arriving every day and living in shelters, a lot of our students told us that they went there to give them food. And because they usually work in kebab stores or stuff like that. And they went there to give them some kebab and things like that, and they refused because they couldn't eat that meat. And they were really just complaining about, and they didn't want food. It's so strange, they just didn't want it. I don't understand, they are poor and they are living in shelters and they just refused it. And that's what it said, that they wanted to have, but they refused it, but they didn't ask anyone about it. Why is it? Or I don't know why they didn't want that food. It was just, okay, it's like that. So they put in this category of themselves that they are even more close than I am. So it's really hard because then you need to start from the beginning that, okay, they have traditions, you have traditions, because we have students from different types of Roma like Romungro and also Ola Roma families. And they have different traditions, completely different from each other, different from our traditions, and different from the, for example, the Jewish traditions, the refugees traditions. So we try to explain them, how do you feel when you just face that someone cannot accept that, for example, you can never cut your hair off. You always have long hair, you always have to have it like really pretty, and you cannot wear short pants, you cannot have Facebook, and they are really proud of their traditions, and they always protect themselves, and they said that it's normal like this, but then they cannot understand that from the other side it's the same. And we just try to talk about this from their personal point of view, at how did you feel when you shared your story and your traditions with others, and they were like, wow, it's so strange, how can you live like that? And we try to share these kind of stories, but I'm afraid of nowadays changing as well, because for them it takes a lot of time to adapt to these kind of situations, to meet other cultures, to meet refugees, and help them not to feel just this fear, because if they feel fear, they become aggressive after 1 minute. When they don't feel that they are accepted, they just react in an aggressive way, and we need to work on this till we have time. I think now in Hungary we have time till more foreigners, more refugees are coming, because I hope that they're gonna come to Hungary as well. and yeah, so we have time, and we try in this way, introducing them to the real world, and yeah.
Well, to come back to your question before, I'm a bit on the pessimistic side, and that said, I think right-wing or far-right ideology didn't rise up. It has never been vanished. I can only speak for Germany, but you know, I heard jokes about Jews even in the East German times, and I do not think that after World War II this ideology vanished from the heads of the people, especially not from the lower classes, especially not there. I think what's happened in the last 20 years or so, it became louder, it became more in public focus, it became more usual. All those things that politicians today say just like that, you know, 20 years ago they wouldn't have dared to talk like that, because everybody talks so, everybody's saying so. The problem is, from my point of view, it's not that we have a political crisis or that right-wing extremism comes up. We have an economical crisis, we have a social crisis, we have a downgoing of social services nearly everywhere. We have more and more people dependent on social welfare because they don't find a job. And we have more and more people fearing that their personal situation will get worse than it is today. And if those right-wing ideology becomes common among the middle class, who starts to fear the fall down, then it can be a danger. This is what history tells us about Germany, Italy, and Hungary in the 30s. Then it became a danger for democracy as well, for our system. So to me, it's more like a social problem, because, you know, when I was, you know, we are working also in refugee shelters. We go there and offer our things to people, because we don't ask where people do come from, we ask for what they are needing. So, and I went there, and the next hour I met a guy from my regular people, And he said, yeah, you were with the refugees, and you're a traitor, and not a German, and stuff like that. And I said, no, but did you hear the stories where they come from? I was there, you know, they come from I don't know, from Syria somewhere. And they just told me how it was in wartime and so, and he just said a simple sentence that means, yeah, but that doesn't make my life better. So, yes, and he was right. Not because there are people who are worse than you, or a situation is worse than you, that does not mean that your life is somehow better. That does mean that we just have to increase or double, or what we actually do is double our services, you know. But this is, you know, this is what's happening is that the poor people do fear that there are coming more poor people. And fear is, to be honest, a currency that we pay in our society. Fear of losing your job, fear of not having the best, newest iPhone, fear of losing information, fear of losing contacts, fear of terrorism, of course. And somehow we wonder, we're so used to that people do fear something, somehow we wonder that they now fear for terrorism or whatever. And to me, it's the crisis or the problem is much more widespread, and so the answers has to be either much more widespread or much more individual. In both cases, it costs more money than we spend. Sorry.
It costs more money than anyone's willing to pay.
Yes.
Anyways.
Obviously.
Okay, thank you very much to pointing at some very important challenges that also go back to what Julia Roig earlier said, that we have to put all our work into like a systemic approach and can't look at it very individually. But now I would ask the audience if you have any questions, comments. There's one. And if you do so, please state your name and your organization.
Stefan Stoyanov, Safer Vote UK. I have two questions. First is to Rado and Rebeka. At some point, Rado already answered, but how do you reach and engage this unreachable youth, which are more vulnerable to be attracted by violent rhetoric and to extreme point of view? Because usually we tend to work and engage in most of activists, and not necessarily this potential. This was to you, and to Bjørn and Stefan, more philosophical question about gender norms and stereotypes. Do you have an idea how more effectively could be challenged? Because at some point gender norms are that lead to and drive to conflict and to violent behavior, they are part of this picture that creates this violent behavior, including of people that we blame to be extremists or terrorists. So, what is your vision about that?
Yes. Maybe the first question first, and I would like to encourage you to not engage into a very deep philosophical discussion so that we can have some more questions.
Okay, so maybe some small clarification, at least for me. Your question was about how we approach to the people which are part of our activities, right? Or yeah. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, our like mainly we work with secondary and high schools. So we organize activities for classes in these schools, and as I mentioned before, when we find somebody among them who express more radical or more extreme opinions, so usually we try to create some specific space with this person or these people. So it's kind of extra activities, like we have some normal plan of activities for schools, and when we find these people, like we don't have some exact plan how to reach these people, but always in these groups at these schools you find some. And so we try to, when we found them, so we try to establish some specific space for discussions, where we use, for example, one of approach from Cultures Interactive, which called narrative approach, when we try to discuss with them not about ideology or about some geopolitical opinions, but we really try to explore what kind of personal history they have. So if they was a victim of some violence or something like that. But part of that is also this problem which I described before, that it's necessary to have several of this kind of meetings or sessions, and we don't have enough capacities for that. So there's a reason why we try to create something, some kind of a group of social workers who can work with them longer than we can. So I'm not sure if I answer your questions, but
okay. In our school, we have this system of people working together. So there are not only teachers, but there are also a lot of social workers, psychologists, mental hygienic workers, and also like mentors who are civils who want to do something with the kids. And every kid has a mentor or a social worker, and they have weekly sessions when they meet. And that's how we got to know about their radical behavior, because during these sessions they usually talk about their feelings or what happened to them. And when we got to know about this kind of attitude, we try to focus on these kids and convince them to do something together, but we don't really tell them what is it all about, but we try to find something that can attire them, but we have this method to reach them. So we just try to find their common interest or something like that, and that's how we try to reach them. And also we have very strong social media influence on the students, because we have, for example, the school radio and the school newspaper, and also a lot of Facebook groups and pages and everything. And they have really hard time expressing themselves when you are face to face, when they are face to face to the teachers or mentors or whatever, but on the internet they are always more open, so their radical behavior is usually very visible when they face something that they don't like on the internet pages of or groups of the school. And for example, during the school radio they have the opportunity to talk about everything they want, or they always choose a topic and they talk about it in 3 or 4 students for 2 hours, for example. And they really rethink their feelings, for example, what they don't really do when they are not listened from others, because they know that others are listening, so they try to think more on the topics. And it works really well, because the others are listening, for example, in the main room, and they are commenting on it, so they reflect, and there are really cool discussions, and we can, I don't know, figure out what do they think really after this kind of radio sessions. And I think it's a really good technique, yeah.
I want to address both these questions, so I'm going to speak before you speak about the second question. Because the first question is really kind of what we asked ourselves when we started Omelas back last year. We asked, how do we find those people who are at the largest need of our services, who wouldn't necessarily reach out to us, who aren't the people who regularly will be reachable. And so what we are doing is really the detective work. We are finding these people. We are listening to all sorts of signals of what their social media streams are saying about who they are, what stories they are telling about themselves in various contexts. And based on this, we are finding people who are vulnerable, who are becoming extremists, who wouldn't necessarily have been reached by anyone else. So we are really doing the detective work in finding people who wouldn't necessarily otherwise have been found, and that's really our goal there. And it's an incredibly important question to ask, because it's a question that we have difficulties answering, and our goal is to find the answer to that one.
Okay, so
and now we can move on
maybe
to
the second question now.
Yeah. And Stefan can start that one.
Well, it was, we were talking about father figures that may be telling a lot about what this is connected to gender aspects. It is a straight society that we are working. What I see is we are facing very conservative role models amongst our clients who have right-wing ideologies. And that means both men and women. And the women even more than the men. What I see is we have several, or I had over the years, I had several male clients who I was suspecting to be gay. They never came out with that, but they behaved in such an, what's the term,
over-defensive,
overacting maledom and being heterosexual, that it wasn't, either it wasn't believable or it wasn't normal. So, and it's a fact that many, or not many, but that there's a lot of German neo-Nazis, also from the upper level in the history, and also from the old Nazi time, have been gay and just came together to find, kind of manhood, brotherhood somehow like that. And that's the interesting part of me is not the man and the man's role model, because this is something you can expect. What depresses me most, it really depresses me, is how conservative, how 18th century or 19th century the girls and the women to behave in that scene. And to strengthen the women and to strengthen the girls in their position in the groups or in their position in life is always a strong point of our work, just because, not because we want to make, prevent from fascism or so, it's just because it's so sad. We live in the 21st century and there's role models for modern women everywhere, and those girls, those young women are still somehow living. They are raised up in families, they're raised up in neighborhoods, and they're still living like we would be in the, let's say 1950s or what. And this is something that comes automatically. And the interesting thing then is, if you strengthen the girls and the young women in that group, in such a peer group, those radical ideas slowly go away. In cases of ideas, not the violence. The violence will not go away like that, but it will be a different kind of violence, let's say a non-political, non-religious violence. It will be just about the girls and the drugs and stuff. It's much better, I would say.
I think when it comes to all forms of extremism, a lot of it has to do with diversity, as I spoke about in the introduction as well. And the denial of diversity, and quite often that boils down to genetics and these ideas about there will be a genocide on the white race, or there will be a genocide against the Islamic world, and so forth. And so in kind of the genealogical, from the genealogical perspective, there are massive issues with topics such as reproduction, which feeds into the rest of a lot of these things. A friend of mine founded the largest neo-Nazi movement in the world, and he has a daughter, and the only reason he has a daughter is that he and his girlfriend thought that it was their duty as white people, as a white couple, to breed a white daughter or a white child. They didn't know the gender before they did it, but that is certainly a big element of all of these ideologies is kind of what Nazi Germany was about in Lebensraum kind of ideology, and what comes in all forms of genocidal ideologies, which are very much related to extremist ideologies. And one element of that is also the idea of gender roles and gender stereotypes, who is doing what tasks in kind of the homes and in the organizations. Women are often kind of recruiters, while men are warriors. There is this idea of this sense of belonging as well, which also stems from the genealogy thing and genocide thing. There is a very strong kind of feeling within, especially the right wing, that white women belong to white men, and interracial, relationships are massively frowned upon, and the worst sin in terms of being a race traitor, which is a big term within the right wing. And again, when everything becomes about reproduction, then homosexuality is also a big issue, because of the reproductive issues that homosexuals face. And so a lot of the hidden sexuality things kick in, the idea of what it means to be a man, and then kind of overstating that through overt machismo behavior. Kind of also following on that line of thought goes into this ideology of what it means to be a warrior, and what it means to be a hero and a man within these movements. And there's so many destructive elements to both what's being taught within extremist movements about what it means to be a proper man, but also what's being taught in mainstream society about what it means to be a proper man. Because those ideologies that we hold in mainstream society about, like, men are not supposed to show emotion, men are not supposed to do all of these things, those are contributing factors to the psychological issues that lead people into positions where they are vulnerable to become extremists, right? So if we had a wider acceptance for various gender fluidities in mainstream society as well, we would be more able to deal with the root causes that are kind of psychologically tunneling people into extremist movements right now. And I think that is one of the more important things we can do as a mainstream society, is widening that scope of acceptance of gender roles and our understandings of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman in kind of the 21st century. Because really we need to up our game there. We haven't really evolved as much as we'd like to think since at least the 1950s, but also, as you say, the 17th or 18th or whatever century. So yeah, there's things to be done.
Okay, thank you. So it has turned out that these were quite philosophical answer questions, and it took quite long to answer them. Of course.
We can have a chat afterwards. That would be interesting.
The only problem is that we don't have time for any more questions now, but I'm sure all the panelists will be around after the panel as well, so feel free to...
We'll be over in the hammock. No.
Feel free to ask us any questions you like, and you'll see if we can answer them. So I would like to thank you very much, and especially I'd like to thank the panel very much to offering us, I think, very interesting insights into how prevention works on the ground in practice, and showing us very different approaches, and also, I think, a very important point to be made, that it doesn't function by itself, but there's a society around it, and it's also important to look at the political environment, as Rado said, that you need political structures that support it, but you also need social structures to support it. And I think that's also an important point to take out of this discussion, besides the fact that prevention and de-radicalization from violent extremism is also very much about feelings and about a personal level of trust. So, thank you. And